In this video, we will talk about the Spring MVC Java Based Configuration. Okay, so by the end of this video, we will understand how to run a Spring MVC application using pure Java code without using any XML file. So I hope that you are continuing this course from the tutorial number 1. So you already have a good foundation of doing things in XML way. So right now we will understand this way. This Java based configuration is pretty much important because it's pretty latest, right? So right now if you'll tell me to create a Spring MVC application, obviously I'll be using the Java based configuration. Now the obvious question which I'll be getting from you right now that, okay Abhilash, then why you taught me the XML configuration? You could have directly teach me the Java based configuration, right? Then why you taught me the XML stuff, right? If it is not needed. Guys, I said XML is legacy, right? This Java based configuration is latest, but we should always learn the legacy stuff as well. Guys, you can be sure, right, what kind of project that you are going to join. You might get a project where all these stuffs will be in XML. So you have to read a XML file and we have to understand that, okay, so this is how I need to activate the component scanning. Okay, this is how I need to create a bin in XML. It's pretty important because, see, personally, the project that I have been part of, right, I have done so much coding in XML, right, because it's my project's demand. So you may get a project which is legacy, so it's pretty much good to understand the XML stuff, and congratulations for completing those stuff. So right now, as we have already have a foundation of doing things in XML and understanding the Spring MVC flow using the Java XML, right now we are going to eliminate the XML file completely when we will transfer all those knowledge to pure Java code, right? So let's do it right now. But before I move ahead and before I go with this particular video, I need to make sure that whoever is watching this video, we all are in the same page. I'm going to ask you a few questions. If you do not have any prior knowledge to Spring MVC, then it might be difficult to catch all those things that I'm going to discuss further in this video because they are going to be kind of advanced, right? So if you do not have any prior experience with Spring MVC, then start doing things from the video number 1 of my Spring MVC course, and that is absolutely free. You don't have to pay a penny for that. Okay, so let me ask you a few questions right now. The first question here is, what is a dispatcher servlet? Pretty easy, right? You might be thinking right now, okay, don't ask me those lollipop kind of questions. Okay, I'm sorry about it. The next question is, what is an application context? Okay, the next question is, what is a web application context? And I'm sure that you can answer this question. What is a web application context is pretty important. The next question, what is an IOC container? Pretty simple. The next question is, what is a view resolver? If you already followed all these videos, or if you already worked on Spring MVC, this is a pretty simple question for you, isn't it? View resolver. The next question, dispatcher servlet has its own web application context. It's a statement. Dispatcher servlet has its own web application context. This statement is true or false. Pause this video for a moment and think about it. I already answered this particular question in video number 5, probably. The next question, how to configure dispatcher servlet in web.xml file? Pretty easy. And the last question here is, explain the Spring MVC workflow, right? How the Spring MVC flow works in XML way, obviously, because I have only taught you in XML. The next question, are you comfortable with Spring core annotations? Obviously, I'll be needing 2 Spring core annotation here in this video. One is @configuration and one is @bin. Okay, if you don't know about these annotations also, you can watch this video because they are pretty straightforward annotations. And these are the annotations we have already discussed, and I'm going to use that in this particular video. @response body, @request mapping, and @controller, @bin, and @configuration. Okay. 5 annotations, right? Pretty simple annotations, isn't it? Okay, so how many questions you can answer from here? I think you can answer all the questions, right? I have pretty much trust in myself that you can answer it. Okay, so if you have any confusion, or if you are not sure about all these questions, or if you're watching these particular questions for the first time, start from video number 1. Okay, so right now, what is the game plan here? So we're going to create a very scratch project right now, and we're going to do things from scratch. We will eliminate all the XML file, all the configuration file which are there in XML, and we will only write code in Java. But before that, okay, I will just show you an application, a Spring MVC application, a very basic scratch level, hello world application here, and I'm damn sure you can understand it because you have already done so much of assignments. So there is an application right here called MVC demo. So first of all, if I'm going to right click, run on server, let's see, what kind of project this is. As I said, it's a pretty scratch level basic hello world application. So let's get the server started. So my dispatcher servlet has been initialized. My server has started here. So I will write here my website.com/test. Welcome to SeleniumExpress, and there is a link to my site. Okay, so how come I know that I have to write my website.com right here? I know you should have an answer for it. So that's because the dispatcher servlet that I have configured, that dispatcher servlet URL pattern is /mywebsite.com. Then /test is what my controller is configured with. So let me start from web.xml file right here. This is the web.xml file that I do have right here. And as you can see, I do have a servlet configured right here inside the web.xml file. So I do have a servlet here. My servlet name is my dispatcher servlet, and there is a link to my dispatcher servlet class which the Spring framework provides me. Okay, there is a init param here. As we already know, the init param is specific to a servlet. Now this init param is specific to this particular servlet, and through this init param I'm providing my context config location, or my application configuration file location, which is inside the web.inf folder, and my application config file name is application-config.xml. Okay, so this is the new file that we get right now. So as of now, we have two XML files. One is web.xml file, then the next one is application-config.xml, which is this one. Okay, we'll be coming back to this particular file again. But before that, here after the init param, I have load on startup right here. So the load on startup tells the server that whenever I'm going to deploy this particular project to my Tomcat knows that, okay, it has a value of 1. The load and startup value of 1. That means whenever my project will be deployed inside the Tomcat, that time only the servlet container will create the object for my dispatcher servlet, or the servlet container will initialize this particular servlet. And where the servlet container is there, don't get confused with the servlet container name, because I'm going to use this particular term pretty much in this particular video. Servlet container is there inside your web server. Who is our web server? Tomcat is a web server, right? So the servlet container job is to initialize the servlets. Okay, we can understand like this right now. So the load on startup, just make sure that whenever my project is deployed inside the Tomcat, and whenever I'm starting my server, at the time only this particular servlet will be initialized. Okay, so what about if I'll not put the load on startup value right here? If I'll not put this particular tag, then whenever the first request is going to come to my server starting from /mywebsite.com, at that time only this particular servlet will be initialized. Okay, now Here is the servlet mapping right here. This servlet mapping confirms that this particular servlet, which is my dispatcher servlet is basically my dispatcher servlet. So this particular dispatcher servlet will handle all the requests coming to server starting from mywebsite.com. So if I'll send any request starting from mywebsite.com, just like mywebsite.com/homepage, mywebsite.com/test, mywebsite.com/hello world, anything, then at that time only, this particular servlet will going to handle those kind of requests, because the pattern I have set right here. And all these things that we have done right here is inside the web.xml file. One point to remember right here is that inside the web.xml file only we are setting up our dispatcher servlet. Okay, clear? Okay, the next thing is, as I said, whenever our dispatcher servlet will initialize, at that time it is going to look for the configuration file, and the configuration file here is inside the web.inf folder, right? So this is the configuration file, application-config file. Here actually we are activating the component scanning. We are creating different types of bean which our application is going to need, just like the view resolver. So all these beans that we're going to create inside the application config file. So inside the web.xml file, this particular dispatcher servlet is going to, during the time of initialization of dispatcher servlet, it is going to look forward for an application config file, and whenever dispatcher servlet is going to read that particular file, it is going to create a web application context out of this particular file called application-config. So one takeaway from here is the dispatcher servlet right here, it needs a application config file to get initialized, right? Remember this point, because whenever we are going to do things in Java code, we're going to follow the same pattern right there also. So as of now, two files, web.xml, where we're configuring dispatcher servlet, and application config file. This file dispatcher servlet needs. Good. Okay. Okay guys, so just now we have seen a Spring MVC project which is configured in XML approach. Right now we are going to code the same thing in Java based configuration. For doing things blindly, we have to understand that, okay, what are the things happening behind the scene? What is actually Tomcat doing with all those web.xml file, all the Spring configuration file? What are the things actually happening, so that we can replicate the same thing, while we are writing code in Java? So basically guys, whatever we have seen, let me show you in a diagrammatical way. So let's say we have a web.xml file, and also we have a Spring config file. I'm sorry, I'm pretty bad in drawing. Let's say Spring config file, right? And here inside the web.xml file, we are actually configuring our dispatcher servlet, or we are defining our dispatcher servlet. So whenever, let's think like if this is a project, if this is your project, and if this is your web server Tomcat. So whenever we are deploying this particular project in our Tomcat, what the Tomcat is doing, Tomcat is actually reading this web.xml file, right? So Tomcat is automatically detecting, mark my word, Tomcat is automatically detecting the web.xml file. And from the web.xml file, the Tomcat knows, okay, these are the things the developer has configured, just like we have configured a dispatcher servlet inside the web.xml file. So when Tomcat is going to read this particular file, it is going to create, or it is going to initialize the dispatcher servlet right there. So whenever Tomcat is going to initialize the dispatcher servlet, and this dispatcher servlet is obviously going to need a configuration file, a web application context to get initialized. So this configuration file I call sometime as web application context, because dispatcher servlet is going to create the web application context out of this particular file. So here in this particular file, we basically activate the component scanning. We create different types of beans, just like if I want to create a data source. Or if I want to create a view resolver, you already familiar with this, right? We basically create a view resolver inside the Spring config file, right? So what is the next thing? So right now, the question is, if I am going to delete this particular web.xml file, because right now I have to create the something like a web.xml file in Java, right? In Java code only, let's say I'm going to create a class, and this class will be just like the web.xml file, and this class need to be picked up by Tomcat, right? Let's say if I'm going to deploy my web application inside the Tomcat, and if I do not have this web.xml file, then I have to do something. I have to write a class, and this class will be automatically picked up by Tomcat. That should be picked up by Tomcat, so that inside this particular class only, I will create a dispatcher servlet object by writing code in Java, just like dispatcher servlet equal to new dispatcher servlet. So, this class should be picked up by the Tomcat automatically. And also I have to create another class file as a replacement of this Spring config file. This Spring config file right now is in XML, right? As you can see right here, application config file. Now this config file, I have to write the same thing in Java code. I have to create another class, right? So I have to create two classes. One class where I can initialize the dispatcher servlet, and one class where I can define my beans, where I can activate my component scan. Okay, basically this class is going to be a kind of configuration class for me, and this class we need to create because our dispatcher servlet should read this particular class here, because dispatcher servlet will be needing that particular config file whenever it will be get initialized, right? So two classes we need right now. One class where we can define the dispatcher servlet, and one class where we can define the configuration, just like here. This class, we're defining a bean right here. We are also activating the component scan. We have to write a class just like this, which is going to be a replacement for this. Oh, so much thing, but it's pretty simple. I can write code right now because I know what to do, and the things are getting clear for you right now. So what is a dispatcher servlet? So as I said, dispatcher servlet is designed with a front controller design pattern. So any request which is going to come to our server, or any request which is coming to our website, right, that request need to go through the dispatcher servlet. So the dispatcher servlet will be there in the middle between the request and your application. It is going to handle that request, and it is going to dispatch that request to one of the controller which can actually handle that incoming request. The next question is, what is an application context? What is an web application context? And what is an IOC container? It's pretty simple. We already know about Spring container, right? The IOC container, there are different types of IOC container. I told you previously, application context, bin factory, web application context, these all are containers. So basically application context is the core container, and web application context is basically extending to application context. Application context is an interface. Web application context is an interface. Application context is the core container. Web application context is designed to handle the Java web-based applications. It has some more feature than the normal application context. Okay, cool. So the next question is, what is a view resolver? A pretty simple question. The dispatcher servlet will use the view resolver, right? Basically, we do not hardcode view name in our controller. We just return a random string from our controller. Then the dispatcher servlet use the view resolver to find the exact view location and the exact view extension of our view name to find where actually our web page exists, right? That's the view resolver. Okay, the next question is dispatcher servlet has its own web application context. True or false? As I told you previously, whenever we are initializing the dispatcher servlet is going to look for a configuration file, and the configuration file is our web application context. The dispatcher servlet is going to read our configuration file and it is going to create a web application context out of it. So all the dispatcher servlet, you can configure multiple dispatcher servlet for an application, and all the dispatcher servlet has its own web application context, right? Okay, so the next question is how to configure dispatcher servlet in web.xml file. I'm going to show you the thing in a couple of minutes. I'll just give you a quick walkthrough of the XML stuff. The next thing is explain the Spring MVC work. How the Spring MVC works in XML way. I don't want to answer this question. You already know about it. Are you comfortable with Spring core annotations? Of course, you need to answer that question. I am kind of comfortable with the Spring core annotations, and I feel I can do coding using the Spring core annotation. Yeah, I should be able to code using these annotations.